All that in half an hour's time in Kaleidoscope. This is Radio 4, it's 10 to 7.
Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. This week sees that miserable eunuch, Mickey Mouse, transplanted to a plastic wilderness called Disneyland, just west of Paris. It's one of those places you're delighted exists, since it's as good as a holiday knowing you're never going to go there. But what a relic Mickey Mouse is. When Hanna and Barbera initiated the era of the subversives, Sylvester and Boo Boo and Top Cat and all the others, Mickey Mouse became as archaic as Little Lord Fauntleroy, a trademark for conformity. What's nice about Sylvester is he brings hope to slobs everywhere. His radiant stupidity, his affectation of cunning, his brainless optimism, his refusal to learn by experience, is truly human. He reminds me of me, whereas Mickey Mouse is sexless and housebroken, a spinster's dream of good behaviour. Well, I've already bagged Sylvester as my own choice, but I wonder what cartoon characters Celia Haddon, Laurie Taylor, Milton Shulman and Nicholas Tucker find an affinity with.
Well, I'll come out straight away. This
you were
character.
shifting uneasily.
Well, I can't bear to hear you talking about Mickey Mouse in such horrible terms. A eunuch, he's happily married to Minnie Mouse. I mean,
No, that was got up by the
a
press.
model of propriety. No, I mean, the point is, children used to love him. I loved him. We had this little club with Mickey Mouse.
Very funny lot you must have been.
We had a Mickey Mouse
You all
song.
came from Lewis,
A
did you?
Mickey Mouse handshake. Now, this isn't now. This is when I was a
The
child.
Lewis Mickey Mouse Appreciation Society.
Mickey Mouse was a perfect child's hero. He had the same childish voice, and
He had the voice of an old gentleman who had been gelded.
It was the right sort of falsetto for how I was talking at the time, and he won all his battles not by aggression
I
and
shudder to think.
sort of all the sort of Donald Duck, Popeye stuff, but by sheer timidity and modesty. And the reason he went was never that children went off him. It was that Disney could never make enough money just by pleasing children. So out went Mickey Mouse, this model family figure, and in came all these much more aggressive people that you like now, which I think as a child were always
One of the
slightly
creepiest
repellent.
things about the mouse is that Walt, or as schoolmaster at my school couldn't bring himself to say Walt, would refer to him as Walter Disney. One thing, Walt, for all that he was a huge millionaire 1,000 times over, owned these studios, he'd still find time to go and do that hooty, awful voice for Mickey Mouse. I think that's the creepiest piece of information.
Do you know Mickey Mouse is 91 now, and Minnie is 89? I think they're terrible. I mean, I used to keep mice, so as a child I couldn't possibly have liked Mickey Mouse. Though I have to say I wasn't allowed to see any cartoons except at children's parties, because my
Were
parents
they
took the
frightened
view...
you'd pick up an accent?
No, it wasn't that. They took the view, they sensed that cartoons actually were about children breaking rules and sticking up for themselves. And in my family, children were encouraged to do neither of these things since it made them difficult to have around. So I wasn't allowed to see them. I saw Mickey Mouse. I think I must have seen Donald Duck.
You would have come to no harm. I mean, he was the epitome of good behaviour.
Well, I don't like any of the animal ones, Bob, because they're none of them furry. They're not even humanised. They're just nasty animals, and I
you
had
don't
real
even like
animals.
Sylvester? I mean, or
Well,
is it
if I've
just the
got to
Disney
choose,
lot?
I'd have to have Sylvester or Popeye, who at least is human, you know? About that.
Nice voice, Popeye's got.
Yeah.
I live so most of my time in a room in which on one side of the room, on 4 shelves, are a collection of Mickey Mouse figures, which my wife has collected. Mickey Mouse standing, crouching, leaning, Mickey in cars, in fire engine, bicycles and skateboards. There, and on the other side, on the other wall, I have a Stedman cartoon, which shows, which is a picture of Disneyland, in which dreadful 15-foot-high Mickey figures are patrolling around, stabbing their eyes and assaulting tiny, frightened girls and boys who are wandering around their feet. And I live with that sort of like ambivalence all the time. I've not quite resolved it, because on the one hand, when I see children now looking at Mickey Mouse again, I mean, because Fantasia came out, and of course Fantasia, Mickey Mouse appears in The Sorcerer's Apprentice, part of that. And watching children reacting to that character the first time round again, I rather sort of felt that perhaps, that to see that, perhaps that's how I reacted then. But I know intellectuals hate Mickey Mouse. There's even the French, only the French could possibly have done it, have done a study to show that of all the cartoon characters, Mickey Mouse is the most despised by intellectuals.
But
that might mean
nice people despise it.
Yeah, but that might mean to follow, Nicholas, that we've forgotten our childhood. We've forgotten the delight we had in him, which you can see aroused again.
The only child who ever liked Mickey Mouse was a reader of the children's newspaper.
I was a reader of the children's newspaper, and I didn't like
That's
it.
contradicted immediately. That's immediately.
You put it all behind you now,
I
Celia.
have.
And I'm
tried
sorry
to put
to
it
have
behind me
aroused
then.
painful memories.
It was painful.
I think someone, not sure who, something like Marshall McLuhan said that Mickey Mouse...
There was no one like Marshall McLuhan.
Disney was
Class of
the
his own.
greatest artist since Leonardo da Vinci.
I think Disney said that.
And that there may be something that's very fact. We're sitting around here talking about that. We don't usually talk about the Mona Lisa as impassionately we do about Mickey Mouse. So I think there is something to be said about the impact that Disney and these characters have made upon life. My own favorite character has already been mentioned here is Popeye, and I love Popeye because he and Clark Kent, Superman, are people who are very modest and unassuming when things are normal. They're like normal people, and then suddenly some evil thing emerges, like the American way of life is threatened or something of that kind. And then Popeye shoves spinach down his throat and becomes...
First he squeezes the tin with one hand,
that's
and
right,
he
with
comes
his
out.
muscles
And Clark Kent puts on his curious underwear, and it made me think that if I had the right diet and wore the right underpants, I too could be one of these great figures. But the other thing you must remember about Popeye...
Before you leave Popeye... Oh, sorry, you haven't left Popeye.
One other thing about Popeye...
Don't interrupt him after he's had his spinach.
No,
The one thing about... You all don't know that they left a national monument in the person of J. Wellington Wimpy. J. Wellington Wimpy was the man who ate hamburgers while Popeye ate spinach. And the world is full now of memories of the Wimpy.
Wimpy, I mean, just like I always liked Dr. Snoddy better than Dr. Cameron, I like Wimpy better than Popeye because his life was dedicated wholly to self-indulgence in the innocent form of getting his hands on as many hamburgers as he could eat. And he was fat and vague and rather attractive.
But see, Celia says she didn't like these figures because they're animals. They're not, Celia. There's no mouse in the world looks like Mickey Mouse.
No, I agree. That's why I don't like
Mickey Mouse is a child. He's got pudgy legs and great big eyes. And, I mean, for example, you remember Goofy? I always used to enjoy him as a sort of strange figure on the screen. It's only when I became an adult I realised he's supposed to be a dog.
Yeah.
But you've never seen a dog in a million years like that. These weren't animals. These were just sort of, imaginary godlike.
But you can aspire to be Super Milton, and you can aspire, indeed, to be Mr. Magoo, but I can't aspire to be any of these things because they're all male. There isn't a single decent female character. I mean, Daisy Duck, Minnie Mouse, Mrs. Flintstone and Barney Rubble's wife, they all get beaten up regularly. That just isn't... I don't know of one. I mean, if there is one...
But here's something to notice before you get off this business of...
Annie, if you want one.
They're all male.
Well, was she a cartoon? I mean, was she a film?
Not so much an animated.
A film and a cartoon.
I just wanted to pursue the female thing.
Yeah.
Have you noticed the man who supplied most of the voices, Mel Blanc? I think he did, Tweety Pie and all of the others. Not Mr. Magoo. Jim Backus did that, and Jim Backus was an exception. Mel Blanc imparted to all the voices a totally camp, basic sort of string. And isn't it odd that all the cartoon characters have epicene voices? I'm just thinking of your point about being male and female. They're neither the one nor the other.
Well, I don't know. I just don't think it's any easier to identify with gay male figures than it is with heterosexual male figures. If you're saying that because they sound camp, it's easier for women to identify with them, I don't actually necessarily argue that. And Betty Boop is a stinker. She's a vile vamp.
I think Betty Boop is really attractive. But I
but I wouldn't want to be Betty Boop.
I think the point I would concede to you, Celia, is that for reasons I've never understood, the adventures of Popeye and what he did in his caravan were the staple of most of our not very nice playground chants. And I think it's because in a curious way, Popeye wasn't done by Disney. And whereas Disney always finally sentimentalized things, Popeye is virile and nasty enough to actually lend itself to our little obscene
But I
songs.
always have the sense, when you were talking about, I always have the sense that all these cartoon characters are rather like domestic rats. They're round at my ankles. And somehow, because I was very tall when I was young, I always thought that I was too tall to like these cartoon characters. They wear mice, they wear small animals, and somehow I associate them with something that's crawling around under my feet. So I've never liked any of them, really. I've never felt comfortable with any of them.
I think that basically Tom and Jerry, for instance, I think probably did more to inculcate a sense of enjoying violence than any other physical thing. And the idea that you could do almost anything to a body and it would survive. You know, you could mince it up, you could drop it 20 stories, you could tramp on it, anything else, and suddenly it would reemerge. It is probably one of the great myths.
Yeah. Well, that's what cartoons are about. They are about very violent relationships and escapes and action of that kind. And I don't think, I think that therefore they're not primarily for little girls anyway. Why don't they have, for instance, I believe on television they have had My Little Pony cartoons. So there's some attempt. But if you look at the genre they don't cover girls and horses, which I would have thought they ought to if they want to get the 9-year-old girl. And they don't even cover a sort of school stories, for instance. Where's the cartoons
what about
of
Centurions?
Well, that's not a film cartoon.
But
Actually.
see, we must go back to Mickey Mouse again. One thing Bob hasn't conceded yet is that Hitler banned Mickey Mouse. So
Really? Well, that is a point in his
because
favour.
Mickey appeared in one film with an Ulan helmet. But if you remember the beginning of Mickey Mouse films, there's always Mickey and Minnie together. It was very much a joint enterprise. And as for innocence, Laurie, I mentioned before Clarabelle the cow. When she first appeared, she had a skirt over her udders.
Yes.
More innocent than that.
No. I wonder, though, I only just want to
Can't get
see...
much more knowing than that, actually.
Knowing Milton's views on the way in which violence on television and film leads to violence in everyday life, I've yet to see from him an article denouncing the behaviour of people like Tom and
that's
Jerry.
coming. I think he's just running it past us to see if it works. Donald Duck, though, oh, how awful Donald Duck. The brainless fowl. Reminds me of... he could pass as Mickey Mouse's minder, the sort of person who knocks the camera out of the cameraman's hands if he gets too close to the star. Awful character. Well, let's have a song. Sailor, Sail Away is that song, and it's sung by Kit and the Widow.
When I realize my favorite dress shirt's been washed with 2 black hemophiliac socks. When our list clearly asked for some Georgian silver, but no, they've sent 23 walks. When I nip off to change all my 50s for 20s, just 2 minutes honest and clamp. When the lighting is low, Sade's singing, I put down my Chablis and wham, I get cramp. When the huge juggernaut I've just passed to the left's masked the last slip road out for the day. When the telephone rings as I'm pouring the gravy, I take a deep breath and I say, Rockall, Malin, Humber, Bailey, Shannon and Tyree. Tyne, Trafalgar, Plymouth, Lundy, Portland, Irish Sea. What though the thunderclouds seem to be hovering? What though it seems that life's not worth the bothering? All I need do is to say, Royal Sovereign, sailor, sail away. St. Abb's Head to Butt of Lewis, Dover Sole or White, North Utsira, South Utsira, Dogger, German Bite. Just whisper Cromarty as you withdraw, lad, and care's ravelled sleeves knitted up as before, lad. A fine 40s Fair Isle jersey once more, lad. Sailor, sail away. Viking forth to southeast Iceland, Faroes, Thames, Biscay, Finisterre or Land's End, Fisher, Fastnet, Ronald's Way. When I'm depressed by each turn of events here, when life seems more like a municipal gents here, I channel light vessel to distant Valencia. Sailor, sail away.
Sailor, Sail Away, sung by Kit and the Widow. And newly out, we have the Oxford Book of the Sea, edited by Jonathan Raeburn. I don't like it. I don't mean the book. I think the book is absolutely excellent. I mean the sea itself. Too much of it waiting to drown people. Well, no. Freud says the sea is the womb, and we want to climb back in, but I just wonder whether he thought this one quite through. After all, the human race went to an awful lot of trouble to crawl out of the sea, not to mention the womb, and out, speaking for myself, is where I want to stay. I once had a fancy for a cottage fronting the sea, but I looked out of the window and saw all that water stretching to the horizon, and I thought, what a gloomy prospect. All it does is heave. And as for boats, well, Dr. Johnson said it. No man who has contrivance enough to get himself into a jail would set foot on a boat, since a boat is a jail with the added chance of drowning. And as for the seaside, oh, how melancholy. But I dare say the rest of you are never out of your wetsuits, are you?
I had a fine view of the North Sea once. I bought it. I bought a flat in Scarborough, and the estate agent told me, yes, sir, he said, it's an even better view of the North Sea than that enjoyed by Alan Ayckbourn. So, but it was too much, and rather, as you say, it didn't do anything very much but heave. And when you just looked at it for day after day after day, you realised how very similar it was. I mean, there was not much change. There are very few storms, tempests, or shipwrecks. Nothing very much happens there. I had binoculars in order to increase the distance in case something was happening further away that I couldn't see near. And I took thousands of photographs, which I've never looked at since. And I decided then that really the sea had to be seen only in relation to large amounts of land, but to be stared at as an object in its own right was impossible.
Did you trace in your attitude to it, not just sort of boredom and it was a bit dull, any sort of, what shall I say, apprehension, alarm?
Well, there was apprehension and alarm when you were aware of the sheer enormous volume of it. Yes. You know, that moment when you carry... You carry a simple plastic washing up bowl full of water from one room to another, and suddenly you feel the water begin to sway and move around you, and you're aware of the volume of the water. And you multiply that by 150 million billion times and see the sea swell, and suddenly that movement of the universe beginning to almost tip on its axis because of that shift of weight.
Just a little worrying.
That is enormous.
Well, I do worry about his home life, you know, with these plastic bottles and the Mickey Mouse things in his shelves and everything.
And the binoculars.
Yeah, that's what I know. Well, the binoculars, you know.
Private life.
Absolutely. What I think is nice about the sea looked on is the fact that it leaves so much space for sky. I like those Suffolk landscapes where it's absolutely flat, and the sea leaves the sky so you can see the clouds and what's happening above it beautifully.
Yes,
I think the sea is like Christmas. I think it's...
wait for it. Wait for it.
I think it's very enjoyable for children and torture for adults. Because I remember...
Well, children don't notice it.
No, listen, I remember
paddle in it.
as a suburban child going to the sea, and I think it was Seaford, and gradually the train got closer, and suddenly we saw this blue between the hills. Everybody cheered. And the next day, there we were, and I ate about 10 chocolate ice creams that day and had little boats I paddled up and down with. And I think without any doubt, it's the happiest day of my life. And then later on, as a parent, back to the sea again, and I read in this book a brilliant description of what it was like then. Tranquility tinged with terror. Because as an adult, you know exactly what you said, Bob, that this gleaming blue thing is a murderous bastard. And just take your eyes off it for one moment, and, your child will be whisked out. And so they gamble and enjoy it. We sort of shiver with terror at the edge of it.
Quite.
I spent hours watching the sea come in. I love watching the waves coming in. And somehow or other, the pulsation of waves reminds me of the pulsation of life. I feel that basically, I feel that basically what's going on in my heart.
Almost post-Freudian.
What's going on in my heart is the same thing as that sensation of in and outness, which I think basically is...
Your heart's going in and out.
Without that movement, life ceases to exist. Without movement, there's only desert, there's emptiness. And therefore the sea is metaphorically...
But it is so, as Laurie said, so repetitive. And I think I said about the melancholy seaside. You see the people at the seaside, and you know they've come there to have a good time, and you look at them, and you can see they're not getting that good time. And I have a feeling that the sea is reminding them that take any number of coach trips you can, it will alter nothing. And the sea can be extremely depressing, simply because it reflects life as you put it.
I haven't made that philosophical comment. I want to...
Oh, that was a preliminary.
I thought there must be...
No. What I want to say is the British in the end are, dominant. They're the only country the sea cannot be dominated. In Britain are the only people arrogant enough to say we rule the waves. You know, we sing we rule the waves. It's a curious assumption that the British have had in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, and
it's a wish, it's not a description.
Yes, they don't mean it.
Now, the difference, I just want to give you a nice historical point.
Oh, do.
The Germans, as a landlocked, sang Deutschland über alles. They didn't think of the sea as a friendly aspect of their environment. Now, this saved us from defeat in the last war, because when I spoke to von Rundstedt about why the Germans didn't invade,
Eric, I said.
why the Germans didn't invade this country, is because Hitler
the sea was there.
That's when John Mills was playing von Rundstedt.
Give him a
Hitler
chance.
said, on land I am a hero, on sea I am a coward. And his refusal to tackle the sea in 1941 saved this country, and going towards Russia instead, saved this country from what I think was definite defeat. So we should all be grateful that we are a sea nation and the Germans are a land
As Eric
nation.
Morecambe would have said, there's no answer to that, really.
I must say, you see, go across the channel, it's a little preliminary until you get to the interesting bit, which of course is the land. But if you take a long sea voyage, once took 2 weeks to get to Ghana, Gold Coast as it was then called in those days, lads, and you looked out, and after a bit, that sort of wasteful, endless glitteringness of the sea seemed to have got on board in some way. And you weren't becalmed, and there was no tempest, and you weren't worried about anything in particular, but you just started to know how the ancient mariner really
That's right,
felt.
and just that business of, even the word that we use, paddling, it's a lovely description of the way in which we sort of like are always tentatively borrowing a little bit of the sea for our own purposes. I mean, to watch seaside is to see everything very close to the shore, to see the very short distance people get away from the shore. And there's interesting at the end of this book, there's that nice description there's a little bit from Rabbit at Rest, from Updike's Rabbit at Rest, where he talks about sailing. Now, people are always going on about sailing and how wonderful sailing is and how much they feel with the elements. And Updike has a lovely phrase where he talks about sailing, teasing the wind and the water by stealing a fraction of their glinting great magnitude. Stealing a fraction. Now, that's it. You're not really in control of the
But did you read
elements.
to the end of that?
Oh, yes, I know exactly what happens at the
where
end.
he's
the sea
trapped under the sail
appalling.
with his girlfriend, and I
Not his
found
girlfriend,
I could
not his
hardly,
girlfriend.
or his granddaughter, I should say.
Yes, granddaughter.
I found I could hardly bear
Quite
to
right.
read
I
that.
found lots of extracts I couldn't bear to read in
What
this.
is interesting about the sea is it has no sense of humor. I haven't heard a
That's
single...
right, I don't think anyone's going to do that.
I haven't heard a single joke about the sea.
And if you haven't heard one, there isn't one.
And I
Are you
think
going
it's
to
about
repair the
time-
deficiency?
It's time there's a Goldberg joke about the sea, and I want to remind you of Mrs. Goldberg with her 5-year-old son Irving was at the seaside.
Yes.
Yo, you're
And
reminding me,
This
yes.
is one, the waves roll in.
And the
Give
wave
him a
rolled
chance.
in
No,
and
sorry.
took young Irving into the sea.
Yes.
And the grandmother got down and said, God, please bring back young Irving. Her mother, he's the apple of his mother's eye. I will sin no more. Please bring him back. And another wave brings back Irving, drops her. And she looks at him, wet little Irving there, and she looks up the sky and says, he had a hat.
Yes.
Very good. I think it was long overdue,
It
actually.
was
Milton.
worthwhile choosing the subject, so we had another chance to hear that one.
The only joke I found in this book was the fact that Coleridge had never gone to sea by the time he wrote The Ancient Mariner.
No, he was coked up to the
And he
gills.
then went on a packet boat to Hamburg and said it was intensely disappointing.
And there was a wonderful moment, because there's one other which wasn't a joke, but I found it funny in Benjamin Franklin's diary, when he said, this morning our steward was brought to the gears and whipped for making extravagant use of flour in the puddings.
But since Laurie has started quoting, he will allow me to quote a bit. I know he doesn't like it, but he's going to have to take that right on the chin. Of course, what we're talking about, what this book is talking about, is not the sea as we've seen it, great dollops of H2O. It's the imagined thing, and you get all those wonderful lines. I can never remember whether that line, white breast of the dim sea, actually is Joyce or Joyce quoting Mangan. I simply don't know, but it's a lovely line. And you listen and you see Gogarty in that poem, I will live with a how does it go? I will live in Ring's End with a red-headed whore. And it ends with the line, and up the back garden the sound comes to me of the lapsing, unsoilable, whispering sea. It's a wonderful line. It's not about the sea at all. It's about uncreated things which can't be spoiled. But that's the sea in the mind. If you ask me, I like the literary sea. I don't like the real thing.
I like the democratic injunctions of the sea, insofar as everybody who goes down to a beach and sits there on the beach and looks out at that huge expanse eventually turns to each other. The beach is the one public assembly point left in the world, perhaps, where people of all classes and races and so on come together, and then suddenly, perhaps with a sense of horror of what is out there, turn to each other and enjoy themselves.
If you're if you're quoting,
I hope you're right.
If you're quoting, you ought to quote Noel Coward about being at the seaside. He said, "There's sand in the porridge and sand in the bed, and if this is pleasure, we'd rather be dead."
But not to a child, because I think you're right about that. Also, the sea has produced lovely, enjoyable, vulgar things like postcards by Donald McGill, Kiss Me Quick hats, shrimp teas, fun fairs, slot machines on the pier, end of the pier shows. I mean, they don't exist anywhere else. The sea did it in some way.
They're very comforting because
comforting.
they come from people who are standing safely on the shore.
Absolutely.
Just looking
That's
at
right.
the sea.
It's about the only place where I think adults play with children without any sense of sort of letting the side down. The funny thing is that, as you say, it's all these things, lovely coloured buses and noises and music and things, and yet a lot of children get lost at the seaside. They wander off, and suddenly they turn around, and there are all these family groups, and no way in which they can find their way back. So, like every good thing, it's got its terrors and it's
It's like my 5-year-old son said once when we set off one day in Brittany to go to the sea. He said, "It's Sunday, Daddy." I said, "Yes." He said, "Won't it be closed?"
It ought to be closed a good sight more often. I think the sense of dread you get, because if you stand on a cliff or if you're on a boat, you're looking out at the sea, and if it suddenly comes to you that it isn't like the sort of homelified world, all the nice fields and the towns, a world that men have made for themselves to be able to live in and to accommodate themselves. It's just like it was a few moments after the beginning, after the chaos. And you're standing there and you're seeing it, and it hasn't changed since then. And that's very, very dreadful and alarming indeed.
Do you think that's why so many of these writers sort of go into technique? Because I noticed a hell of a lot of bits I skipped about, let's get the two bows spliced and have a kedge bent to the hawser, and then we'll pull up the anchor and veer 40 fathoms right or something. I mean, dreadful bits. I couldn't understand any of them.
Well, but what I was just talking about was the primal scene, but I'd see it hasn't grabbed you. You're all sort of nodding off there and making jokes, and that really proves to me that it is a rather frightening element. But all right, if you want to make jokes, I think sailors lose their wits after a life on the briny, and I remember Robert Lusty, the late distinguished publisher, saying he'd gone on a cruise on a boat called the Berengaria or something like that, and at the cocktail party the captain said they should raise their glasses and toast the ship, and he'd forgotten what ship it was on, and he called it the Coronia. I don't know whether that proves anything.
Celia Haddon, Nicholas Tucker, Milton Shulman, and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Kit and the Widow provided the musical interlude, and the program was produced by Michael Ember. Robert Robinson will be back to stop the week next Saturday at the same time, 10 to 7. More good conversation later this evening in Conversation Piece, which goes to the theatre, to the Hackney Empire in the East End of London. The theatre is more than 90 years old, and it began life as part of a chain of suburban music halls where all the big stars played, from Maury Lloyd and Charlie Chaplin to Tony Hancock. It's now enjoying a new lease of life as a variety theatre. And in this evening's programme, Sue McGregor talks to Roland Muldoon, the theatre's director, about his own life and the new life that's been breathed into the Hackney Empire. Conversation Piece is at 10 to 9 this evening here on Radio 4. And now it's time for the Kaleidoscope Feature. Next Sunday, the 26th of April, Radio 3 will be broadcasting a fully restored, uncut version of Hamlet by William Shakespeare in a joint venture between BBC Radio Drama and Kenneth Branagh's Renaissance Theatre Company. Paul Allen meets members of the distinguished cast of the first new radio production of Hamlet for 20 years, a cast which includes Dame Judi Dench, Derek Jacobi, Sir Michael Houghton, Richard Briers, and as the ghost, Sir John Gielgud. Music is by Patrick Doyle. Co-director, and in the role of the Danish prince, is Kenneth Branagh. A Radio Hamlet.
to allow the audience to get a sense of our Elsinore. In a sense, I felt that it was not our obligation to convince them that it was 1601 or whenever we think the play might have been written, but that it was about real people in a real court, some distance from our time, that we should leave it to them to get a sense of another place, to create the relationships and the sense of an alive atmosphere. The important thing is to make it live on radio.